The morning after the battle, the palace was quiet. The rebels had been defeated, but the tension in the air remained. Valera stood on her balcony, watching the sun rise over the distant mountains of Trevian. She could feel the warmth of the sunlight on her scales and, for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. She had survived. She had helped defend the palace, and she had someone by her side who saw her as she truly was. Ethan entered the balcony quietly. He had been checking the perimeter of the palace and now came to report to her. "The rebels are completely gone," he said. "The outer colonies are secured. For now we are safe." Valera turned to him, her eyes bright. "You fought so bravely yesterday. I didn't know I could feel so alive." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was determination in it. "Thank you for showing me that I can be strong too." Ethan smiled. "You've always been strong, Princess. You just needed someone to remind you." They walked through the gardens together, speaking quietly. Valera asked questions about Earth, about human families, about friendship, and about courage. Ethan answered patiently, telling her stories of humans who had faced impossible odds, who had fought for others, and who had built strong bonds even in the darkest times. Valera listened, fascinated. Every story gave her new ideas about bravery, loyalty, and love. As the days passed, the bond between Valera and Ethan grew stronger. She trained harder than ever, learning to move with agility, to handle basic weapons, and to think strategically. Ethan guided her every step of the way, never rushing, always encouraging. He treated her as an equal, never hiding his respect, and never judging her for her appearance. One evening, as they practiced near the palace walls, Valera paused and looked at Ethan. "Do you think humans ever fall in love with someone because of their heart, not their looks?" she asked. Ethan studied her for a moment, then smiled gently. "Yes, I've seen it many times. A person's courage, kindness, and loyalty matter far more than their appearance. True connection comes from the heart, not the surface." Valera's heart beat faster. She realized she had begun to feel something she had never felt before. A warmth, a longing, a desire to share her life with someone. Ethan had awakened feelings she could not ignore. She wanted to be near him, to talk to him, to see him smile. She wanted someone who saw her as more than just an alien princess with unusual features. Then came the next challenge. A new wave of rebels had gathered, more determined than before. They knew that Valera had survived, and they sought to capture her, to break the Trevian Empire. Scouts reported that the rebel forces were approaching under cover of darkness, planning a coordinated strike from multiple directions. The king and his advisors were worried, but Valera refused to hide. She had learned courage, and she intended to prove it. Ethan prepared the defenses. He placed barriers, traps, and warning systems, but he also trained Valera in how to react if the rebels breached the palace. She moved with confidence, her body now agile and strong, her mind sharp and alert. She had learned to trust herself, and she trusted Ethan completely. Together they were a formidable team. The night of the attack arrived. Shadows moved across the palace grounds, and the rebels struck quickly and fiercely. Ethan and Valera responded without hesitation. Ethan fought with precision, taking down attackers one by one, while Valera used her newly learned skills to block, dodge, and strategize. She was no longer the frightened princess who hid in her tower. She was a warrior, a protector, and a partner in battle. During the chaos, Ethan was cornered by a group of rebels. They outnumbered him, and he was forced to defend himself while calling for Valera's assistance. Valera did not hesitate. She activated the relic from the royal archives once more, sending a pulse of energy that stunned the rebels long enough for Ethan to regain control. Together, they pushed the attackers back, forcing them to retreat. When the battle ended, the palace was quiet once more. Guards and soldiers tended to the injured, and the rebels had been defeated. Valera and Ethan stood together, breathing heavily but unharmed. Valera looked at him, her eyes filled with admiration and gratitude. "I never imagined I could fight like that," she said softly. "I never imagined I could feel alive." Ethan placed a hand on her scaled shoulder. "You did more than fight. You stood tall when everyone expected you to hide. That is bravery, Princess. True bravery." For the first time, Valera allowed herself to smile fully without fear or hesitation. She realized that she was no longer alone. She had someone who saw her for who she was, who respected her, and who had shared danger and victory with her. Her loneliness, which had been her constant companion for so long, was finally gone. The following days were filled with rebuilding and celebration. The palace opened its gates and Valera walked among her people with confidence. She had expected judgment, whispers, and rejection, but instead she found respect. The citizens of the Trevayan Empire had heard of her bravery and her partnership with Ethan. They saw not the scales or tusks, but the courage, intelligence, and strength she displayed. Valera and Ethan spent time together every day, training, talking, and exploring the palace. They laughed, shared stories, and learned from each other. Valera felt a connection growing stronger with each passing moment. She admired Ethan's bravery, his honesty, and his kindness. He admired her intelligence, her courage, and the way she faced the world with determination. They became inseparable companions, bound not by duty alone but by genuine trust and friendship. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the palace, Valera approached Ethan. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Ethan, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I am glad you came. You see me, the real me, and I want to be near you, always." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "Valera, you've shown me more courage than anyone I've ever met. You've taught me that true strength comes from the heart. I would be honored to stand by your side always." Valera felt her chest swell with warmth. She had waited for so long to feel this connection, this acceptance, this bond. Now it was real. She realized that love was not about appearance. It was about trust, respect, and shared experience. With Ethan, she had found someone who valued her entirely, without judgment or fear. Days turned into weeks, and peace returned to the Trevayan Empire. Valera continued to learn and grow, mastering new skills, exploring new ideas, and building her confidence. She walked openly among her people, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. The citizens respected her bravery and admired her determination. Ethan remained by her side, always ready to defend, to teach, and to share in her discoveries. Together they faced challenges, solved problems, and strengthened the bonds between their two worlds. Valera felt a sense of purpose she had never known, a feeling that she could make a difference not only in her life but in the lives of others. One quiet evening, as they watched the stars, Valera turned to Ethan. "Do you think humans and Trevans can ever truly understand each other?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "We already do. Understanding comes from patience, listening, and respect. We've learned that in our own way, and now we can show others how it's done." Valera nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She had waited so long for someone to see her heart. She had been alone, hidden, and rejected, but now she was recognized, respected, and valued. For the first time in her life, she felt complete. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but Valera no longer feared it. She had courage, she had strength, and she had someone who truly cared for her. The lonely princess who had once been hidden away was now a leader, a warrior, and a companion. She had found someone who saw beyond the scales and tusks to the heart beneath, and that heart, she realized, was the most beautiful thing in the universe. As the twin moons reflected off her shimmering scales, Valera reached out and took Ethan's hand. The warmth of his touch reassured her, and she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. No longer alone, she was ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy might bring, confident in the knowledge that she was seen, respected, and loved for who she truly was. And for the first time in her life, Princess Valera smiled without reservation, knowing that she was no longer the ugly princess who lived in solitude. She was Valera, brave, strong, and loved, and the galaxy was vast, full of possibility, and waiting for her to shine. Evan was not the type to follow trends. In a galaxy bustling with exotic marketplaces and flashy technology, he preferred the hum of his small ship and the orderly lines of spare parts stacked in his workshop. Traveling through interstellar hubs and trade stations was routine for him, but today, for reasons he could not explain, he wandered into the crowded section of the station where companions were displayed. Most humans around him moved with excitement, their eyes scanning containment pods as if they were shopping for toys or rare collectibles. Alien companions came in all shapes and sizes. Some had multiple eyes that glimmered like stars. Others had wings that shimmered faintly even while folded. They were meant to assist humans with chores, provide companionship, or simply be an impressive presence on a vessel. Evan had never understood why anyone would want one. He walked past row after row of transparent pods, feeling a quiet discomfort. The aliens inside were a mix of anxious, angry, or bored expressions, almost all seeming trapped by the expectations of the humans observing them. A young merchant boasted about the intelligence of one alien, waving its claws and muttering in a language it clearly did not understand. Evan shook his head and turned to leave, not wanting to witness more of what he considered an unnecessary display of dominance. Then he noticed her. She was in a small, unassuming pod at the far end of the hall away from the crowd. Unlike the others, she was calm. Her skin shimmered softly, changing colors in gentle waves, and her eyes held a strange warmth that made Evan pause. There was no resentment, no fear, just quiet curiosity and an unusual sense of hope. A translator screen flickered to life on the pod's panel. "Hello," she said, her voice gentle but precise. "If you were to choose me, would I be allowed to help with engines?" "I love fixing things," Evan frowned. The others had not spoken to him, not asked him anything at all. Most of them simply waited, resigned for someone to pick them. But this one, she wanted a purpose. She wanted to be useful. He found himself studying her closely. Her skin shifted to a soft gold, a subtle glow that he later learned was a sign of gratitude in her species, the Ariel. They were known for being peaceful and patient, yet economically vulnerable in recent years. Many had been forced to sell themselves to distant buyers simply to help their homeworld survive. Yet here she was, calmly waiting for someone to need her, to trust her rather than using her as a status symbol. Evan felt an unfamiliar pull. Against his better judgment, he stepped forward to the auction terminal. He didn't know why. Perhaps because he wanted to see what it felt like to choose someone who actually wanted to be chosen, rather than be sold. With a few quick commands, he placed a bid. The auctioneer glanced at him, confused that anyone would even consider her, but the crowd hardly noticed. No one else cared about her. The bid was accepted. He wasn't entirely sure what he had just done. He hadn't expected her to react. Many companions were taught to obey immediately, but when the pod unlocked, her eyes lit up in what could only be described as genuine happiness. "Thank you for choosing me," she said, stepping lightly out of the pod. Her feet didn't make the usual mechanical sound of restraint. They were soft and deliberate, like she belonged in the space around her. Evan hesitated, unsure how to respond. He expected her to be grateful, yes, but not truly happy. Not this level of warmth that seemed to ripple through her very being. You're welcome," he said, scratching the back of his neck. She tilted her head slightly, examining him with a curiosity that felt alive. "I like learning." "May I look at your ship?" "I want to see the engines," Evan blinked. Most companions didn't show initiative or ask questions. They obeyed. They were tools, not partners. But this one was different. There was a spark in her eyes, a determination that made him feel lighter, in a way he hadn't expected. He led her to his small transport vessel. She followed without hesitation, her movements graceful, almost careful yet deliberate. She touched the edges of the panels gently, studying the instruments with focused attention. "This part seems worn," she said softly. "I can fix it if you allow me." Evan paused, unsure what to say. You can?" She nodded, her skin flickering a soft blue this time, signaling concentration. "I enjoy it. I like helping." Cautiously, he handed her the tools. Within minutes, she had repaired a faulty scanner that had been bothering him for weeks. Not only was it fixed, but she had adjusted it to improve efficiency. Evan stepped back, watching, amazed. He had expected a passive companion, maybe one that cleaned or organized. Instead, she was thinking, improving, creating. He realized, almost with a start, that he didn't need to give orders or instructions. She seemed to know how to help without being told. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who didn't just exist in the ship but belonged there. During the trip back to his small home on the edge of the trade route, she asked question after question, not invasive but curious. She wanted to know about the planets they passed, the engineering systems he used, even his preferred foods and routines. Evan, who usually answered in short, clipped responses, found himself explaining things in detail. He noticed that she listened carefully, sometimes repeating things back to ensure she understood. There was a sincerity in her attention, an eagerness to engage. When they reached his secluded outpost, she immediately began organizing the ship for efficiency, adjusting compartments, recalibrating tools, and even suggesting small changes to the engine layout that made maintenance faster. Evan felt a quiet pride watching her work. He had never imagined that having a companion could be like this, not subservient, not decorative, but genuinely collaborative. By evening, they were sitting together in the small cabin, the glow from her skin reflecting softly on the metallic walls. She hummed a gentle tune while inspecting a circuit board. "This is enjoyable," she said without looking up. "I like contributing." Evan considered her words. Most humans, he thought, bought companions expecting obedience or status, but here she was, choosing happiness in her work. She wasn't acting out of fear, duty, or obligation. She was genuinely pleased to be useful and valued. He asked quietly, almost hesitantly, "Why are you so happy to be bought?" She paused, looking at him with steady eyes. "Because most of my people are chosen by necessity, not by need. Most humans only see our value as property, not as beings. You chose me because you needed help. That is different. That is kindness." Evan felt a lump in his throat. He had never considered that buying a companion could be an act of kindness rather than ownership. It was just a transaction in his mind, a whim born out of curiosity. And yet, seeing her genuine joy, he realized that for her, it meant freedom and choice, even within the circumstances. For the next few days, life on the small outpost became a routine they both enjoyed. She helped him repair drones, recalibrate sensors, and even build small tools for the station's maintenance. Every time she completed a task, her skin would shift through colors: gold for gratitude, soft blue for focus, a light lavender when she felt playful. Evan began to recognize the signals and responded unconsciously, offering nods, smiles, or quiet words of encouragement. One night, while he was checking engine diagnostics, she sat beside him and quietly said, "I am glad you chose me. I feel like I belong." Evan glanced at her, surprised at the vulnerability in her voice. He had not expected her to show emotion so openly. There was no manipulation, no trickery, just honesty and a simple, heartfelt sentiment. He realized he had never thought of a companion as someone who could feel belonging, only as someone who existed in space with him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her glowing form and simply said, "I'm glad you're here." She smiled, a soft curve of light across her face, and turned back to the engine panel, adjusting a few wires. The calmness she radiated seemed to settle over the small cabin, making it feel warmer, less mechanical, more alive. Evan began to notice small things he had ignored before: the way she handled tools with precision and care, the way she organized supplies to maximize efficiency, and the gentle hum she made when she was content. She was not just an assistant. She was a presence that improved his life, made him more focused, more mindful. One evening, a supply drone arrived late. Evan had been frustrated and tired, but Lyra, with a playful tilt of her head, offered to unload it herself. She moved with such efficiency and grace that he couldn't help but laugh. Her joy was infectious. For the first time in months, Evan felt light, unburdened, and oddly hopeful. By the end of the week, Evan realized that having her around was not about convenience. It was about companionship in the truest sense, a partnership built not on ownership but on choice and mutual respect. Lyra was happy to work, happy to learn, and happy to simply exist in his life without expectation beyond that. As he lay in his small bunk that night, he found himself thinking, "I didn't buy a companion. I found someone who needed to be found. And maybe she found me too." He drifted to sleep with a strange feeling of contentment, knowing that life on this quiet outpost would never be the same. Somewhere deep inside, Evan felt a sense of anticipation for what was to come, a sense that he and Lyra were only beginning to understand the possibilities of their unusual partnership, and that the galaxy might hold adventures neither